the difficulties you have detailing the reality of the dreaded B word now. I mean, it is quite surreal, isn't it? I know I'm often quite rude to you if you're still under the impression that it was a good idea, because I don't understand what it is you're holding out for. You kept telling me that fishermen would be better off. You kept telling me that it was good for farming. Just two examples. You kept telling me that there'd be no border in the Irish Sea. You kept telling me that we'd still have frictionless trade. You were telling me at one point that our freedom of movement wasn't going to be affected. We'd be able to keep ours. We'd just be able to stop all the Romanians coming here. All of those things they're not just unlikely. They're now categorically proven to be wrong. And yet still you say that it was a good idea. And I understand the psychology of it. But what I mean is I'd happily never talk about it again in my life. But my job is to tell you stuff that matters, stuff that's important. Theoretically, even if I'd encourage you to vote for Brexit, my job would still be to tell you stuff that matters and stuff that is important. But I suspect I'd find it very hard, because it would have to begin with a mea culpa. It would have to begin with an apology. It would have to begin with a reverse ferret, a revision, a change of mind. But it's farming today, and this is really, really important. And of course, again, we find ourselves confident that it won't be reported in almost all of the British media. BBC's terrified of this government for reasons that are pretty easy to understand, I think. The government and much of the newspaper industry continues to contribute to a climate that saw Nicholas Watt, the political editor of Newsnight, being screamed at and chased by a baying mob in London earlier this week, footage that went incredibly viral on the internet. People in my line of work who tell you daily, sometimes it seems, that the BBC doesn't like Britain or the BBC doesn't like you. They cause that. They are inciting people to precisely the sort of violence that we saw on the streets. And that's why the BBC is cowed as an institution. There's got many fantastic individuals there still. But as is often the case, lions on many occasions led by donkeys. So you're not going to get the news. So where do you turn to get the news? Regarding, for example, the announcement that we are going to sign a trade deal with Australia. We haven't signed it. This was the weirdest bit of the news, as far as I was concerned, is that they announced that there was definitely going to be one, but they haven't done it yet. I mean, I don't get that. And weirdly, stuff that was announced here appears not to be true, or appears to already be under review. So in answer to the question of how do we find out what our trade deal is like if we can't rely on the British media, I wonder whether the answer might be to have a look at the Australian media. Do you? I mean, I know there's a danger there that the Australian media might be pulling the wool over the eyes of their population, just as Liz Truss is trying to pull the wool over your eyes. But on the other hand, of course, if they mention numbers, you know me and my flipping obsession with receipts and evidence. So don't give me the feelings. Don't give me the rule Britannia waves the rules rhetoric. Give me the numbers. Give me the figures. How much more ceramics are we going to be able to export to Australia? Don't laugh. That was on the flipping press release. British cars. What's the most prominent British brand of car as opposed to Japanese cars that are made in Britain? Do they still make Morgans in Malvern? Do we know? Do they still make Morgans in Malvern? So anyway, they're going to export loads more British cars, because if you're in Australia and you want a Toyota, why on earth would you buy one from Japan, which is just over the way, when you could get one shipped all the way from Sunderland? I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? Everybody understands that. And thank God we don't have any worries about the environment or carbon footprints or anything like that, because everybody in Australia should clearly be buying their cars from the other side of the world. What else did they put on the list? Confectionery. Biscuits. I wish I was joking. And finally, the one that may actually be the clincher, ceramics, which I presume is like Wedgwood and posh pottery. I presume it is. I can't think what else it would be. It's not going to be garden gnomes, is it? Imagine if Liz Truss turned up trying to claim that Brexit had been a good idea because of its giving a big boost to the garden gnome industry. It might be enough to change John Major's mind. That's quite a niche political joke, which draws upon the livelihood of John's late brother Terry, who was a lovely bloke. I had the pleasure of meeting many, many times, but I'm not going to explain it. You'll have to buy the memoirs. Not mine, Terry's. I don't know what the benefits are for us. We had Dmitry Grozobinski on the programme. who was a trade negotiator for Australia. And he said, effectively, I've had a good look at it. It's great news for Australia. I can't really see what your lot are supposed to be celebrating. He goes, it might be hiding inside a giant cake, but I can't see what your lot are supposed to be celebrating. I saw another trade expert say, how would this deal be different if the Australians had just written a wish list and there'd been no British involvement whatsoever? Again, responding to the early reports of the trade deal. But you can turn on your telly in this country and you'll find somebody, probably Digby Pudding-Jones, banging on about how brilliant it is, and it all looks absolutely lovely. Look into my eyes, look into my eyes. The trade agreement is incredible. The trade agreement is incredible. You're back in the room. Just don't ask why or where or how. It's mad, right? So you have the caveat that Australian politicians may be blowing smoke up the population of Australia in the same way that the Vote Leave government continues to blow industrial quantities of smoke up your fundament. But that's where the numbers come in. The clip I'm about to play you features Michael McCormack, who is the acting Australian Prime Minister. Acting, I presume, because Scott Morrison is on a world tour. I don't know, but we usually have someone stepping into the bridge, like when they do PMQs and someone else does it. Is it Raab at the moment? I presume that's what acting Prime Minister means. I don't know, but it's not the point. He's being interviewed on Channel 9 News in Australia. Did my accent go a bit Australian then? Did you pick that? That's a Channel 9 News. Channel 9 News in Australia. Channel 9 News in Australia about this free trade agreement. I want you to really listen to the end. The end is absolutely crucial on this. But also, before that, listen to the numbers. Because if they're telling you the truth, they will give you the numbers. If they're not telling you the truth, or they're trying to mislead you or manipulate you or gaslight you or groom you, they'll give you the rhetoric. Or, perhaps more pertinently, the flags. I wonder whether there is an experiment to be done on the relationship between the number of flags in the background of an interview with a British politician and the number of falsehoods or embellishments or exaggerations that are punted in the course of the interview. I don't want your flags, baby. I want your figures. Very, 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 very. Just checking the clock before I decide how many verys to share with you at this point in proceedings. Very, 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 very few figures from Liz Truss. Here, by contrast, is the acting Prime Minister of Australia, Michael McCormack.
Australian producers, Australian farmers, indeed Australians, full stop. Carl, this could mean $1.3 billion of boost to the economy. And indeed, with sheep meat, I just noticed you had a woolly beast there. There's going to be indeed 25,000 tonnes of lamb chops and others have free and duty-free access to the UK market right now. Potentially 68 million customers bidding for Australia's wonderful chops, wonderful sheep meat, but beef as well, sugar, all of those tariffs, immediate access to duty-free access to UK markets, and eventually over a period of between 8 and 10 years for those agricultural commodities, there won't be any tariffs at all.
So given the situation right now, how is an Aussie producer going to be benefiting more from this deal as opposed to the last?
Well, it's more access to more markets. So with beef, 35,000 tonnes of beef will be going into the UK market, potentially ramping up to 110,000 tonnes over an 8-year period, and for duty-free access. Sheep meat, 25,000 to 75,000 tonnes, and immediate access for dairy, cheeses, for sugar, 80,000 tonnes. They're big numbers, and so that's going to be great for the say casino beef producers, the Junee lamb producers, indeed the Mackay sugar growers.
Here's the problem that I foresee. This morning already there's blowback from some of the Scottish beef producers, some of the Welsh beef producers, some of the Northern Ireland beef producers. This is by no means a done deal, is it?
I'm not so worried about those ones you mentioned. I'm always concerned, and I always put Australians first.
Fair play. Fair dinkum. That's a bit of a worry if you're a farmer, I presume, isn't it? And it gets worse. And again, we have to rely upon the Australian media for this. There's quite a funny thing that's happened, actually. There's a clip of an Australian journalist on ABC talking about the thing I'm going to share with you after the next break. And we couldn't work out what her name was. So I teased the producer because the way the name comes up on the screen it looks as if her name might be Victoria Coronavirus, because she's in the state of Victoria and she's talking about coronavirus. So I did that joke with the producer. It's a great hilarity here in LBC Towers. But then I made the mistake of tweeting, does anyone know who this actually is? Because we couldn't get the name of the journalist from the clip that we'd been sent, or that I'd found on Twitter. And foolishly, having just done the joke myself, everybody obviously piled in and did the same joke. So, yeah, I think her name might be Victoria Coronavirus, James, or Vicky Virus. So that's so far so funny. And then someone actually got it right. It's a journalist called Kath Scully who works for ABC. Kath Sullivan, who works for ABC in Australia. And then, rather beautifully, Kath Sullivan has just replied to my question of, does anybody know who this is? And then Sean's written, is it Kath Sully? And Kath Sullivan herself has just replied, well, it's certainly not Victoria. So the joke has just gone all the way around the world and come back again. I'm basically Lisa Stansfield. Quite a few of you pointing out that you thought that the trade deal with Australia involved a 15-year wait before any of the worst implications kicked in. Oh, no. 35 tonnes of beef, 25,000 tonnes of sheep meat, straight away. I don't know what that's going to do to the farmers in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland and England and elsewhere. But I do know that the acting Australia Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, in trumpeting this trade agreement with Liz Truss, has essentially told Channel 9 News in Australia he doesn't really care about them. Why would he? It's Liz Truss's job to care about them, right? Yeah. Well, it's a good job that they don't also have staffing shortages, isn't it, in British farms? It's a good job there haven't been any reports lately about fruit rotting in fields or vegetables going unpicked or farmers struggling to find bodies who will do the back-breaking work that is often involved in agricultural work. Because if Liz Truss had just, for example, agreed to make it easier for Brits to go to Australia to work on farms, then the problems that British farmers are already facing would be hugely exacerbated. And having said that, I mean, I think we can all be hugely grateful, can't we, that there are no farm worker shortages in Australia, because if there were farm worker shortages in Australia, I don't know, like 26,000, then the win that the Australian government would have secured by making it easier for Brits to fly to Australia to work on farms would be, well, that would just be insane, right? Here is Kath Sullivan of ABC News talking about precisely this story.
Boris Johnson said that he didn't think that should be mandatory or compulsory for those who wanted to stay in Australia. Scott Morrison agreed, but as part of that agreement, in order to get the support of the National Party to support this free trade agreement, he has agreed to create a new visa, and very much the agriculture and horticulture sectors are hanging on and hanging out for some detail about how many workers this might attract and when it might come into effect, and just how far it will go to solving that 26,000 farm worker shortage.
Oh boy. So that is why I've decided to focus more upon how other countries' media are reporting their trade agreements with Brexit Britain than I am on how the client journalists and the slavishly sycophantic media in Brexit Britain is reporting the continuing catastrophic failures, delusions and deceits of Boris Johnson's government. Unbelievable. They're not only going to flood our market, potentially, and we'll talk to experts and farmers, indeed, well, both actually, in the coming days and weeks. But they're going to flood our market with potentially cheaper meat, which will potentially put you out of business. But they're also, the traffic in the other direction will be farm workers, potential farm workers. You couldn't make it up, could you? No, well, I didn't.